Hi everyone, I'm David Fisher, and this is Presidential Chronicles, the series of books and videos on American history as seen through the lives of the presidents of the United States. This episode is from the life of James Monroe, and the focus is standing up for honor. The year is 1794, and Monroe has just left his position as a United States Senator. He's returned to Virginia, but he is not out of work long because the President of the United States needs his help. This is George Washington in his second term, and he's still facing challenges foreign policy-wise with Britain and France. Washington has an official policy of the United States of neutrality associated with the war between Britain and France. Washington wants to keep the United States out of it, but it's hard to keep out of it because neither France nor Britain are happy that the U.S. is having trade with its enemy, and that putting American shipping at risk. And so Washington decides to send emissaries to both countries to see if they can work out some agreement to calm the momentum against the United States and see if they can work something out. So Washington picks John Jay, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, to go to Britain, and he picks his friend James Monroe to represent the United States as the new minister to France. Now, Monroe probably should not have taken this job because he was not in alignment with what the administration's policy was, which again was of neutrality. Monroe favored the French. He was a Francophile like Thomas Jefferson, and if he was going to be the minister there, he was going to be challenged to actually hold the administration's position of neutrality, but he couldn't say no to George Washington, so he agreed to the post. Well, in his instructions, he got actually what he was looking for. It said, "We have pursued neutrality with faithfulness. We mean to continue the same line of conduct in future. And to remove all jealousy with respect to Mr. Jay's mission to London, you may say that he is positively forbidden to weaken the engagements between this country and France. It is not improbable that you will be obliged to encounter on this head suspicions of various kinds," the last line being a dramatic understatement. Suspicions of their kinds was throughout France, including in the head of the minister, James Monroe, about what John Jay might be doing over in England. But he takes the assignment, he heads to France with his wife Elizabeth, and he goes in front of the National Convention to give his opening remarks. And not surprisingly, they're pretty glowing of friendship between the United States and France. He says, "France, our ally and our friend, and who aided us in the contest, has now embarked in the same noble career. And I am happy to add that whilst the fortitude, magnanimity, and heroic valor of her troops command the admiration and applause of the astonished world, the wisdom and firmness of her counsels unite equally in securing the happiest results." Well, James Monroe, again, not surprisingly, saying a lot of positive things in his introductory comments to the French as the new minister from his country. Well, for this, he gets rebuked by Secretary of State Edmund Randolph, who says, "We do not perceive that your instructions have imposed upon you the extreme glow of some parts of your address. After these remarks, I must observe to you that they are made principally to recommend caution, lest we should be obliged at some time or other to explain away or disavow an excess of fervor, so as to reduce it down to the cool system of neutrality." They thought Monroe's comments were over the top, going beyond neutrality. So Monroe takes his licking, and he's still pretty concerned. He's concerned about the administration backing him. He's concerned about what's going on in Britain with John Jay, but he continues to do his job. Well, his fears are realized in his mind when the Jay Treaty with England finally comes out, which he, and like Jefferson and Madison and many others, feel is a complete sellout to the British. They got a little couple of concessions that the United States got, but they didn't get the big things they were looking for. Britain got some favorable outcomes. It avoided war with Britain, which is why Washington agreed to submit it to the Senate, and it was barely approved. He wasn't in love with the treaty, but it helped avoid war, and it was good enough to go forward with. Well, not in the mind of James Monroe. In fact, Monroe said to his uncle, Judge Joseph Jones, "Jay's treaty surpasses all that I feared, great as my fears were of his mission. Indeed, it is the most shameful transaction I have ever known of the kind." He wasn't the only one in France who felt this way. The French government also thought it was a sellout to the British, violating their own treaty, violating Washington's proclamation of neutrality. The French Directory running the country now responded along these lines. They actually withdrew their own minister from the United States, not to be replaced, and they abrogated the previous treaty they had with the Americans. So this is a really tough time for James Monroe, and it was about to get tougher because he could see that he now is in the crosshairs to kind of be the scapegoat in why France is reacting this way. George Washington said, "The truth is Mr. Monroe was cajoled, flattered, and made to believe strange things. In return, he did or was disposed to do whatever was pleasing to that nation, reluctantly urging the rights of his own." At the urging of the new Secretary of State, Timothy Pickering, Washington fires Monroe. He recalls him from his job as minister to France. This is a public embarrassment to Monroe, and he comes back, but he is not ready to take this lying down. He is going to defend himself. And in fact, he writes to Pickering that if you suppose that I would submit in silence to the injurious imputations that were raised against me by the administration, you were mistaken. I put too high a value upon the blessing of an honest fame, and have too long enjoyed that blessing in the estimation of my countrymen to suffer myself to be robbed of it by any description of persons and under any pretense whatever, including from the father of my country, the man I have admired my entire life, George Washington. So what does Monroe do when he doesn't get very good satisfaction from Pickering, who really just tries to blow him off? Monroe takes out his pen and he writes and he writes and he writes a 473-page book refuting the charges against him that led to his firing. Point-by-point defense. He called it a view of the conduct of the executive in foreign affairs of the United States, and he took on Secretaries Randolph and Pickering and the President George Washington. When it came to honor, even the father of his country was not going to be immune from James Monroe standing up for his honor. It led to a complete break between Monroe and Washington. They were done, but he was adamant that he was going to stand up for himself. Well, this episode is about standing up for honor, and we have one more example to cover, and this might be particularly interesting to fans of the musical Hamilton, which, by the way, count me as one. Lin-Manuel Miranda's play is beyond phenomenal. One of the greatest parts of it is how well it adheres to history. I mean, the facts are pretty solid in Miranda's play, but he does deviate from Ron Chernow's phenomenal book in taking poetic license in a couple of places, including a story that really should have included James Monroe. This was related to Hamilton's affair with Maria Reynolds, and he's being blackmailed by Reynolds' husband, James. Now, in the play, three people come to confront Hamilton over this. In the play, it's the characters of Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, and Aaron Burr, and they confront Hamilton about these payments that they found out about, and they charge him with excessive speculation and perhaps using government funds, because he's Secretary of the Treasury at the time, this is 1792, of using government funds in some illegal fashion. Well, this scene does occur, but it's not Jefferson, Madison, and Burr who confront Alexander Hamilton. It's three congressmen, and their names are Frederick Muhlenberg, Abraham Venable, and James Monroe. James Monroe, one of the three people that confronts Hamilton over these payments, these blackmail payments to James Reynolds, because they, again, are concerned that there could be something illegal going on. Well, Hamilton comes clean. He talks about the affair. He talks about the blackmail. Monroe takes copious notes to make sure he's got it all down. They talk about it and they say, you know what? Nothing illegal here. Let's move on. And so Monroe sends his notes to a colleague in Virginia, basically for safekeeping. He forgets about it. He goes to Europe on the job for President Washington we talked about earlier. But then he comes back. It's now 1797. Hamilton has now left the cabinet because Washington's administration is over. Hamilton had resigned shortly before that. He's back in New York. And a pamphleteer by the name of James Callender, a real troublemaker in a couple of different areas, comes out with the story about Hamilton potentially with these potentially illegal payments to James Reynolds. This is now 1797. James Monroe is back in the country, and Hamilton is convinced that it was Monroe who leaked these notes. Well, Monroe says, I didn't do that. I have absolutely not. I'm a man of my word. I said I wouldn't do it, and I didn't do it. He thinks he might know who did it because there's a gentleman by the name of John Beckley who was involved in the safekeeping, and he was a bit of a troublemaker as well, so it could have been Beckley who released him to Callender, but Monroe was adamant it wasn't me. Well, Hamilton is making noise, and they have a meeting. They come together at Hamilton's home ostensibly to talk it out, and it does not go well. It becomes heated. And there was a sitting congressman by the name of David Geltson who copied down the following exchange, starting with Hamilton. "This, as your representation, is totally false." Monroe, then rising from his chair, follows, "Do you see I represent falsely? You are a scoundrel." Hamilton, now on his feet, "I will meet you like a gentleman." Monroe responds, "I am ready. Get your pistols." And then John Church, Hamilton's brother-in-law, says, "Gentlemen, gentlemen, be moderate." Tries to calm down the scenario before a duel was about to commence. Well, they do calm down temporarily. Monroe says, "You know what, let me go check with the other congressmen, see if we can find out what happened with the notes." He goes away, but over the next week, things are not calming down. And Hamilton is still upset. Monroe is still looking to defend his honor, and the duel apparently is almost back on. They even decide to identify seconds to negotiate how to move forward. And this is where one of the characters from the play, Aaron Burr, actually is involved, where Monroe picks Burr as his second, and in this case, he must have done a pretty good job because there is no duel. It turns out, somehow they rationalized it, that neither one would admit to challenging the other. Both were ready to stand up in their own defense and accept a challenge in a duel, but neither was willing to admit that they actually initiated the challenge, so the duel went away. But now we finally understand, and by the way, that opened up that path for Hamilton to follow, for fans of the play, the Reynolds pamphlet, where he admits the affair to make sure that nobody's talking about him doing any illegal acts. It also opens up that path for the duel that Hamilton would have with Aaron Burr when Burr kills Hamilton in a duel a few years later. But in the immortal words of one of the characters, Thomas Jefferson, in Miranda's play, "If you don't know, now you know," how James Monroe almost dueled with Alexander Hamilton over the Reynolds affair in 1797 in standing up for his honor. And that is James Monroe and Standing Up for Honor from the life of James Monroe. For more Presidential Chronicles, check out my books on Amazon.com, and don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Until next time, I'm David Fisher, and this is Presidential Chronicles.